Hey guys, and welcome back to Bridge the Gap. I have some exciting news to share. Today is a special day with Bridge the Gap because today, for the first time ever, we have gone international. We are bringing a guest on from just over the pond from the UK. If you don't know who I am, my name is Jessica likewise, and I'm the CEO of Hope Education Services. I started Bridge the Gap because I've noticed there was a big gap between how people see autism and what adults with autism say that autism really feels like. And as a result, there's some well-intended professionals that are making some mistakes. So this show is an invitation for adults with autism to come on to give us feedback as professionals and as parents and just as people in society who want to create the best world possible for ourselves to live in, on how we can perceive autism in a way that makes people feel loved and appreciated. So today I'm really excited to bring Michael Barton on the show. And let me just tell you a little bit about him. So Michael was diagnosed with autism at a young age, back when it was called PDD-NOS. Today that would be comparable to level 2 autism. Michael didn't talk until he was 3 years old. A lot of the parents who are watching the show, you have young children, maybe they have a speech delay and you're wondering, whether or not your child's diagnosis will always be there, whether or not they can improve, whether or not they're going to be able to learn to speak and to do amazing things. Well, Michael is going to be the answer for you, and he's going to show you, not tell you, but show you that the answer is yes. Michael's amazing. By 7 years old, his diagnosis was changed. He was then diagnosed with high functioning autism. So that answers questions parents ask, right? Can the autism levels change? Yes, they can. Today, he is a very successful, and he's a media career as a data analyst, and he's also an autism advocate and public speaker. And it is a privilege and pleasure to welcome him on the call. Welcome, Michael.
Hi there, Jessica. Yeah, thank you very much for having me along. I mean, it's quite an experience on my end to be featured, well, across the pond relative to me in the United States as well. I mean, I have given talks over the past 9-10 years across the UK, even in the Republic of Ireland in one instance. But yeah, I haven't quite broken into the States just yet.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the United States. And another exciting thing, if you are watching this is the first episode that will also be airing on local television. So welcome if you're watching this on local television. If you want to check out the YouTube channel, you can go to getautismanswers.com. That's where you can subscribe to this channel if you're watching this locally. But yeah, this is a big, exciting week for all of us. So Michael, let's just dive right into this, and the fact that you can, and you have these memories and the ability to tell us about what autism was like for you as a child. I certainly want to go into what it's like today, but let's just start from the beginning for parents that are watching this and wondering, what is their little kid thinking and experience? What was it like for you when you were a kid?
I mean, that's a very broad, open-ended question. I mean, one thing about autistic people, well, me in particular, is that, well, not always great at answering open-ended questions, preferring more closed questions with a more simple answer, but I'm going to give it a shot nonetheless. So when I was a child, as you've already mentioned, I was diagnosed with PDD-NOS aged 3. Now, at that young age, I mean, I wasn't talking, I was non-verbal until I was 3 years old. But the interesting thing is around that sense, I mean, from my parents' perspective, I mean, not many people have that much of a memory being age 3. But they said when I did start talking, it was as if I almost started talking in complete sentences very quickly. So it's as if I was listening and taking in all the information. It's almost as if I chose not to speak for quite some time, which I think was quite an interesting observation. And obviously, going throughout my time at school, I've acquired support. I mean, in the UK, children are often given a statement of education or, statement of education, which means like this child needs to have support. And yet, at the age of 7, I was diagnosed with high functioning autism, which in the new system would be equivalent to tier 1 autism. Yeah, I think one of the main things that parents need to be aware of for their children is just, well, autistic people are different. I mean, our brains are wired differently to everybody else. And I think that one of the best things that you can do is just appreciate that your child is different. Autism is a developmental condition. So while autistic children develop at different rates to most people, that doesn't mean to say we won't develop essential skills. Like we may need more help when it comes to things like social skills, but certainly in my case, things like music, maths, and the sciences came to me much easier than they would do for neurotypical children. So yeah, the summary of that is to just appreciate that your child is unique and different, and to, well, just help them to be the best version of themselves.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that one of the things that is undervalued is the special skill sets that people with autism bring to our society. And, we do want to support everyone in the best way possible. And as a result, you have professionals who want to help people with autism to gain skills that may not come as easy. But there's also this really great asset that people bring to the table. So can you discuss a little bit about that and about the, like, really for you, and I'm going to, and this is good feedback for me, making this a more close-ended question. When you hear about people wanting to help people with autism or recover people from the undesirable effects of autism, and then also accepting autism and appreciating people for their uniqueness and what they bring to the table, what does that difference look like for you?
So the difference between the strengths that autistic people have compared to that of neurotypical people. I mean, I think as a child, one of my main assets, I mean, it still is today, is something like my attention to detail. So I'm much more able to pick out small details that most people don't usually notice. Now, as a child, this actually proved to be quite a hindrance, because one thing that most people look for is eye contact. So when you're speaking to someone, it's generally accepted that you look them in the eyes when you're speaking to them in order to show the other person that you're listening to them and to be able to read their facial expressions. But because autistic people are very detail-oriented, eye contact was difficult for me as a child. So instead of reading someone's facial expression, I might be thinking like, my God, he's got a big nose. So if anything, it was better for me to not look at somebody's face, because it was either I can make eye contact with you or I can listen to what you have to say. So, I mean, the solution which we came up with to overcome this was for me to look at somebody's mouth instead, so that I could still pay attention to what they were saying, and it gave me a focus. Like if it was a noisy environment, I could try to lip read the other person. So yeah, this is just one area in which just a slight workaround has helped me to focus on what the other person's saying while doing something that is socially acceptable at the same time. I mean, on top of attention to detail, autistic people often develop special interests, so an intense interest or obsession with a specific topic. One of the reasons I think autistic people develop special interests is to help us control our environment in a world designed for neurotypical people where, well, we can't have the control that we want, where we want to have a good understanding of the world, just like everybody else. But, well, it's a very people-oriented world, and autistic people often aren't so people-oriented, more object-oriented. So this meant as a child, I was interested in things like dinosaurs, sharks, and the universe, and almost somewhat inevitably Pokemon. And it meant that I could develop such an intense level of knowledge about a specific subject that meant that, well, it's quite easy to see that autistic people can become world experts in their field of interest. And one main difference, I think, between being a child and being an adult is that as a child, most things are dictated for you. Like you have to go to school, you have to have English lessons, you have to do things that you don't want to do, which is something that autistic people find harder to accept. But as an adult, I have much more choice over what I do. I don't have to go to English lessons, I don't have to attend poetry class or do anything like that, which I don't like to do, and also don't have to do a retail customer-facing job, which doesn't play to my strengths. Instead, I'm able to play music, I'm able to do judo, which is something else that I've done from a very young age. And also I'm able to be involved in a job, quite luckily actually, because certainly in the UK, only 16% of autistic adults are in full-time paid employment. So I'm able to be in a job that uses my skills and abilities, because I'm much more able to look at numbers and spreadsheets and databases and work with that on a day-to-day basis rather than in a customer-facing job. I hope that's at least gone some way to answer your question. I know I went off a little bit.
No, I mean, this is amazing, and people want to hear from you, not from me. This show is about featuring adults. I'm just here to facilitate, and I am learning just as much as all the parents watching this show. Working with children is very different than speaking to adults, and I think that not enough professionals are listening to adults. And, back when I started working with people with autism, I was working with children. It was 2008 when I started. And, I've shared this statistic before on the show. That meant that adults would have been born before 1990. At that time, Facebook obviously didn't exist. And at that time, there was believed to be only 1 in 10,000 people with autism. I don't know that those numbers really are real, but what that did mean is there was no unified adult population of people with autism that could do what we're doing today. So this is just an incredible, unique opportunity that even just being able to pioneer it and be part of it, I learned just as much as everyone watching the show. So please do all the talking. I did have I had 3 follow-up questions based upon what you said. So let's see if we can answer the 3 of these. Now, a lot of professionals with autism, myself included, we teach children to make eye contact. Now, I tend not to be that professional that requires a child who is verbal and who's a teenager to always look at you. I also think that generally speaking, because most people are multitasking, we all always have our phones next to us. Sometimes even today, I think like that social aspect of eye contact is almost not even the same as it was 10 years ago, right? You can be having dinner with your friends and you're texting back and forth and still having, not with your friend, you're on your phones or scrolling social media and you're still having meaningful social engagements. I do think that aspect has changed, and I'm never that person. I just try not to be that professional that forces those social etiquettes on people that might be uncomfortable with them. But, for me, I do teach eye contact for children at a very young age, usually typically kids that are under 3 who are nonverbal or non-vocal at that point. So they're not talking. So I teach them that they can use eye contact as a means to request. And so for some of the children at that age, doing something like a picture system or even pointing may be really challenging. And I've heard people say before, well, eye contact is hard. And this is the first time I've heard anyone say it's distracting. I've even heard people say that eye contact is painful for kids with autism. Have you found that to be true? And what do you think about the idea of not forcing eye contact as a teenager, if a person can communicate and it's then their choice, but as a child trying to teach them, this is a method of communication. You can use this to get what you want. How would you feel about that?
So eye contact is actually a very interesting topic. It's one of the first things that is looked for when it comes to diagnosing autism or to see whether a person is autistic or not. But it's actually a very cultural thing. In our Western culture, eye contact is expected. But in Muslim culture, for example, if a child makes eye contact with an adult, that's seen as questioning their authority and is very disrespectful. And there are also African tribes that suggest that eye contact is not a good idea because looking into someone's eyes is almost like looking at the sun. And this is coming from a cultural perspective, not just an autistic perspective. But what I also want to question is when we say we make eye contact, you don't constantly look at another person's eyes all of the time. If you're having a conversation with someone, maintaining constant eye contact for more than about a few seconds actually does feel painful to neurotypical people that aren't autistic. So I think what needs to be done is that, we need to explicitly teach autistic people, social skills in general, but when it comes to eye contact, just autistic people and children need to know why eye contact is important. It's all part of the whole non-verbal expressions and like facial expressions. But the thing is, autistic people often find non-verbal communication very difficult to understand. Instead of being very multitasking, we like to focus on one thing at a time and just process things one at a time, much like a computer would, for example. So, when it comes to eye contact, we want to listen to what you have to say. That's the main purpose of having a conversation. Eye contact or trying to gauge another person's facial expressions comes secondary to that. So if you put 90% of our effort trying to understand what you're saying, 10% to force eye contact every now and then can be too difficult for many autistic people, particularly children. And it's something that needs to be practiced. And with anything in life, I believe the more you practice something, the better you get at it. And social skills are absolutely no exception for that. But with autistic people, it's a hard-coded skill like learning a musical instrument or learning to drive. You need to put in your 10,000 hours or so, or however long is required, in order to master these skills. But The problem is neurotypical people pick up social skills instinctively, but I just cannot emphasize enough how important it is that autistic children need to be explicitly taught social skills. And when you say you need to make eye contact with me, you need to make it much clearer and more specific, because we like things to be specific. We like the details. So just eye contact for the sake of eye contact isn't going to happen because we don't necessarily understand the motivation or purpose. But if you explain, well, if you at least look at my face, which gives them more options, then it shows me that you're paying attention to what I'm saying, and that makes me feel good. And if that's reiterated often enough, then, well, we can learn social skills. It just needs to be done in a way that, well, we can understand.
Yeah, that's really great advice. When I first started working with kids with autism, my background is an ABA, and one of the things we've been discussing in the show, and I've had this open conversation with on my YouTube channel, is that ABA has changed a lot. But we would have these lessons where we would sit directly across from the kid, and you'd say, "Look at me," and you had to look and count to 5. And it was only correct if they held it for 5 seconds. And that's just weird. We don't really do that in social interactions at all.
Really?
But
So what's the point in teaching autistic children something that doesn't happen in a social situation very often?
exactly. But what I might do is play a Thomas the Train video on the phone and then pause it and then wait for them to look at me. And as soon as they look at me, I'll put it back on as a way of showing them, okay, the looking at me was how you were able to communicate with me and request that you wanted this. So making it very functionally appropriate. I think that it's important for professionals who are watching this to understand that, making everything we're doing very, very functionally appropriate, making sure it's useful, and making sure, if you're working with a younger child, you talked about making sure it's clear as to why and there's a purpose behind it. Well, that looks differently if you're teaching, obviously, people who are older, like children that are 9, 10 years old, who might even be able to understand you. If I'm teaching a 20-month-year-old to make eye contact, I can't do it the same way, right? Because a 20-month-year-old, whether they're neurotypical or autistic, they are not going to understand mostly an explanation period. So it could be something simple, like, okay, when you look at me, I press the on button. That's different than just saying, look, and then oh, good job, you looked at me, which is what a lot of professionals do. And it doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't really, you're just teaching someone look means look at you. It's not really teaching social skills.
Yeah, but also, I just wish to reiterate and re-emphasize the point that autism is a developmental condition. So for a kid that's 20 months old, eye contact can still be uncomfortable for them. And you just mustn't have the same social expectations for a neurotypical child of that age as a child who is autistic. So especially with young children, they develop at their own rate. So you just need to be cautious when trying to introduce uncomfortable concepts to them.
Yeah, and that's really, really great advice. And so the other thing I wanted to ask you about, and this is the opposite end of the spectrum, and this is actually, I'm asking this for a friend of mine. She's going to actually come on to the show. She has 3 children with autism. One of them is an adult, and they just started their first job. And they're in the workplace, and they're struggling because this is new to them. Or they actually have been working, but their first full-time job. And it's overwhelming. At the end of the day, they're having overloads, and it's very challenging. And you brought up the point that people with autism tend to be either underemployed, or meaning that they don't have enough work, or they're not employed at all. And there was this, I think, expectation 15, 20 years ago that adults with autism would always, so to speak, live off the system. There wasn't necessarily the idea that people with adults would be able to, or adults with autism would be able to work and support themselves financially. And the great news is that as we've seen this rise in autism, the people are improving, and really a lot of adults with autism are capable of having jobs, and not only having jobs, but really making very meaningful contributions. Like you said, as a data analyst, the fact that you have autism, it makes you uniquely qualified. And I know people who have autism who are programmers, where someone who's neurotypical might not pick up on those details and can look at this program code for hours and not figure out what's wrong and why it's not working. And someone with autism looks at it instantly and they're like, oh, well, this is exactly what's wrong. So people have so much to offer, but the world does not seem to be set up in a way that supports people with autism in a way that makes them most successful. So, what supports do you think that the society would, I don't even want to say people with autism would benefit from, but I think society in general would benefit from if we were more inclusive and more accepting of autism? How could we do a really good job of making sure that people with autism have the supports they need and the environment they need to work in and be successful?
I think the best thing you can do is just, well, treat autistic people, any other people, like just a human being at the end of the day. It's like you have different expectations for different people. And, well, as with anyone, just put yourselves in an environment in which you are able to do things to the best of your ability without any unnecessary expectations. And we certainly can excel. So an example which I use, I found out a couple of years ago. So I went to an event in Cardiff, the capital of Wales in the UK. There was someone that came along who managed an autistic person and was saying that they were really struggling with their work. Now in the UK, when it comes to employment, now if you're not obliged to say whether you are autistic or not when it comes to applying or having a job. But if you do say I'm autistic, it is required by law that the employer gives you reasonable adjustments. So this boss could tell that his autistic colleague was struggling. So he took them into a meeting room to say, like, well, you can tell things are not working for you. Like, what can we do to help you? So they had a discussion on the things this employee was struggling with, and they came up with 3 simple solutions to help this person work much better. Firstly, at the beginning of the day, like, he'd have his own parking space. So every day when he comes into work, he has the same parking space and doesn't have all the stress associated with finding a parking space. Secondly, it was an open plan, hot desking office, and they made sure he had his own desk in the corner of the room. And thirdly, what they did was they made sure that other colleagues could only speak to them during certain times of the day, so that for the rest of the day, they didn't have to worry about potential interactions with other people, which can be more draining for autistic people, which meant he was able to exclusively focus on his work. And these 3 simple adjustments meant that this employee was soon doing the work of 4 people. So when it comes to reasonable adjustments, what I would say is that small things can make a big difference, but it is very important that you are consistent with them.
That's really good advice. And it's funny because when I was thinking about more global, like larger supports, but it seems like even the small things can make a really big difference.
It's just things like when it comes to social situations, like neurotypical people don't find social situations draining. If anything, many neurotypical people actively seek out social stimulation and interaction. But for many autistic people, it's the other way around. Social situations can be draining for us. They can take up a lot of our mental capacity, which certainly in my case as a data analyst, like, social skills aren't very relevant when it comes to my job. So it's good to just know that I can be on my own, knowing that I can just focus on the task in hand and I can dedicate all of my brain power to doing my work rather than making small talk with my colleagues, which isn't going to get the job done.
Yeah, and that's making a great point. Now, a lot of people with autism in the United States, they wind up in doing things like working as cashier checkouts or working, within a grocery store, like bagging groceries. Those are jobs that a lot of, especially like someone now, obviously you're very intelligent and you're very articulate. And we do know that autism is a spectrum and everyone's story is different. And like you said, your diagnosis changed. That won't be the story for everybody. So there will be people with autism that are not as articulate as you are, who may not necessarily have the academic skills you had. You said, math came very naturally to you. What I found is that there are people with autism who are exceptionally intelligent, and there's people with autism that struggle academically. And I don't even know that on either spectrum of that exists in a higher perspective than in the traditional population of people. Like everybody, there's people who have different skill sets and people who have the ability to do different things. I have someone who I'm going to bring on this show, and I've actually interviewed her before, and she's working at a grocery store. And, for her, she's always getting feedback on that she's not dressing appropriately, and she feels highly criticized, and she's not getting that support that she needed. So what would you feel about, like, in terms of the workplace? For someone who is in one of those jobs where they have those social pressures, how can people do a better job of, it shouldn't matter, right? If she's dressed in a way, like, this person likes to run, so she'll run to work in running clothes, and then they're upset that, she's wearing a running shirt. As a society, should it matter? Or should we accept people exactly how they are all the time, or should there be these social rules? And I think not only in autism, but in general, what is your opinion on that idea of acceptance, just that everyone is who they are?
When it comes to acceptance, it's a nice ideology to say we should accept people for who they are. But in reality, while people can put on a brave face or a poker face, like, everybody does have their own criticisms about other people, whether they are, like, whether you show them or not. And then with any customer facing role, I mean, it's important to make sure that your customers are happy. I would go as far as to say, like, while we consider such retail jobs to be like bottom of the career ladder rung, I would argue that many of those jobs are not actually very well suited to autistic people. I mean, if I were to work in customer services at a grocery, for example, I would struggle with that more than I would struggle with my current job. I find my current job much easier, which would certainly pay considerably more and requires considerably more skills than doing a standard customer facing job. When it comes to considering autism on the spectrum, which is the separate point you've made, it's not just the one-dimensional line, like you're not autistic or you're very autistic. It's much more complex than that, because autism is a multifaceted condition. The way I like to see it, like, the human spectrum is a sphere. Like, you've got a big globe, everybody's on that spectrum, and just one part of it, one small section of it, making up a couple of percent, are people that are autistic. And the closer you are to this part, the more likely you are to be autistic. So it's a hugely complex diagram, and autism can cover a huge, well, as I said, it's an essential part of the human spectrum. And when it comes to, well, how to help autistic people cope in such retail jobs, I mean, autistic people aren't necessarily well suited to the social world. So I would argue for first level jobs to get people on the career ladder, things more like sorting, organizing, data entry, things that make use of our skills, because the current base level jobs are not well suited to our skills. I mean, we're not always that great with other people, and I'm happy to accept that autistic people do have weaknesses and things that we struggle with, but you cannot ignore the things that we are good at. And the people that help put us into jobs should make sure that we're put into jobs that do use our skills, things that we are better at. I mean, I use myself as an example, as I've already said. I'm much better suited to my current role as a data analyst, working with databases and spreadsheets, working with billions, inconceivably high amount of numbers every single day. And that's much easier for me than working in a grocer's.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic point. And I'm thinking about that, and I'm like, well, yeah, you know what? You're right. Because most of the people that are employed in that position, maybe not like yourself, who got to choose an industry, some of the people who I'm talking about who may have a little bit less skills probably were put there by job placements, and were probably put there by, professionals who just said, oh, well, this is a base level job. Let's put this person here, but without taking into account that they're actually making them face the things that are the most difficult for them. And that's an incredible point. So for you people who are watching this, if you are a professional who works with adults, or you are a career prep, you help people prep for careers, let's really look at what a person's strengths are and not put them in a position where they're playing to their weaknesses every day. That's an incredible perspective. I think this has been an amazing show. And if just that came from this, that is so valuable, because I think it could change everything for adults with autism. If career people that are transitioning and people planning for careers actually got that piece right, we might live in a very different society in general. Like you said, adults with autism have so much to bring to the table. So Michael, I just want to close with, if parents are watching this and they're wondering what autism's like for their child, and they're wondering what is going to happen to their child, and in just kind of 1 minute or less, speak to that parent who's watching to this, and let them know, what is going on, how can they be the best possible parent to their child with autism.
I mean, the best thing that parents can do is to just like watch their child and try to understand their child and get rid of the preconceived notions and judgments that most parents have about their children, and just watch and learn how they function, how they act and interact with their world, and just make them to be the best person they can possibly be. Things like social skills may come later, but we have numerous other skills, such as attention to detail, which cannot be forgotten about, and things like maths and the sciences and engineering, and these are all desirable skills to have in the workplace. So it's just a question of, don't ignore an autistic person's strengths. That's what I would suggest. That may be very difficult in a world where autism is diagnosed as a medical condition. It's often referred to as an autism spectrum disorder, but being autistic is a bit like being left-handed in a world designed for right-handed people. Just because someone's left-handed doesn't mean that they're broken. It's just, you need to treat us as a unique individual, and just, parents want to help their child have the best life possible. So, just be a good parent and make sure you're not forgetting about your child's strengths and what they are good at. That's what I would conclude with.
Yeah, and that's an incredible way to end the show. So thank you so much, Michael. Really appreciate you.
No, thanks for having me on, Jessica.
Thanks. So again, if you tuned into this, maybe this does premiere live on YouTube, so that may mean that you didn't catch the beginning. My name is Jessica. Likewise, I'm the CEO of Hope Education Services. It's my privilege, it's my pleasure, and my passion to start the show to create a conversation between autistic adults and professionals on how we can do a really better job to serve the community. I think a lot of information was brought out here today. It's been an incredible experience. If you've watched the show to the end, I have a free gift for you. Just go to my website, hopeeducationservices.com, drop your name and email, and I'm going to send you the first chapter of my book, just as a gift for watching this show. So thanks again so much, Michael, and to everyone who tuned in on live television for the first time tonight, welcome, and thank you for doing that. And that gift is there for you too.